All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you're tuning in, we are welcoming you to Woods and Waters Question and Answers. This will be the first in our series. We're going to get underway here in just a second. We know some folks might be finishing up lunch and just starting to tune in, so we'll get underway shortly. Again, this is Woods and Waters Questions and Answers with the Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters, LL Bean, and the Outdoor Industry Association. This is the first of our series of questions and answers, and later on in this webinar, you'll hear about our next series, so stay tuned and with us the entire time. So I'm gonna go right ahead and start to kick us off. Like I said, this is the first in a series of questions and answers for Woods and Waters, and we're proud to kick it off with our partners at LL Bean and the Outdoor Industry Association. My name is Andrew Bosse. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters. We work with individuals, partner organizations, businesses, and the National Park Service to advance one of our nation's newest public lands right here in Maine. We aim to add a margin of excellence to our park that public funds alone can't achieve. Our member contributions of time, talent, and treasure fuel our work as we support visitation to our park, improve the park's infrastructure, engage youth programs around the area and our state, and also advocate for our park. Our mission is to preserve and protect the outstanding natural beauty, ecological vitality, and distinctive cultural resources of Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument and the surrounding communities for the inspiration and enjoyment of all generations. Before we move forward, I'd like to acknowledge that the land that presently comprises Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument is the ancestral home to the Penobscot people. In this moment and before where we are today, we've been thinking as a team about how we can truly achieve that mission, and specifically the part that says for the inspiration and enjoyment of all generations. We're still learning about the history of these lands and its people, and we're more committed than ever to learning from each other and how to create a better tomorrow for all of us, but particularly for historically marginalized communities. We don't see this work ever having an ending point, but it's urgent and important to commit to now. A couple housekeeping notes before we kick off this conversation. This webinar is being recorded for potential use later. And in a second, I'll turn it over to our moderator to introduce our panelists. But before then, we have invited folks that are attending to submit questions before we started today. And we got a lot of questions. Unfortunately, there's no way we're going to be able to answer all of those questions during this time. We are taking live questions as well. And in order to ask a live question, at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a Q&A button. That is the appropriate place to ask your question. And we will get to it in the later part of this webinar. Again, we will not get to all of questions on the webinar today, but someone with the Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters will follow up with you afterwards if your question wasn't answered. So let me introduce this webinar. Around the world, say the word Maine, and you'll conjure up images of a beautiful coastline and woodland landscapes. And more often than not, an outdoor retailer integral to the state's history and economy for over 100 years. As the conservation movement blossoms in the 21st century, LL Bean continues the company's philanthropic legacy through support of our beloved public lands here in Maine and elsewhere. Next, I'd like to introduce Lise Aangeenbrug, who is the Executive Director of the Outdoor Industry Association, starting just earlier this year. She previously served as the Executive Director of the Outdoor Foundation, and before that, Lise was the Executive Vice President at the National Park Foundation, where she worked with members of our team here today to create Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument. Lise, take it away.
Thank you so much. Really glad you all could join us this afternoon. As Andrew mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Outdoor Industry Association, which is 1,300 companies that range from small mom and pop angling shops up to large companies like LL Bean and the North Face. And we are in business to collectively ensure that we have thriving outdoor businesses, thriving people and a thriving planet. Because when we think about the outdoors, we know it's a system, and our businesses will only be successful if we have places for people to play, land that's protected, and people that want to go outside. So we're really excited today to have LL Bean joining us. LL Bean is a member and a leader within the outdoor industry, not just in Maine, but they've helped protect places from neighborhood parks to national parks, and in this case, a national monument, Katahdin Woods Waters. So I'm going to start by introducing the other panelists. We have Lucas St. Clair, who's president of the Elliotsville Plantation, and he and his family worked tirelessly to get Katahdin Woods Waters designated as a national monument and up and running. And he's also a founding board member of the Friends of Katahdin Woods Waters. We also have Shawn Gorman, who serves as the executive chairman of LL Bean. I don't feel like I need to say this next part for most of you, but for listeners who may not be as familiar, it's the Freeport-based Maine company, outdoor retailer founded by his great-grandfather, Leon Wood, or LL Bean, in 1912, and he serves on the Outdoor Industry Association board. We are also really fortunate to have Steve Smith joining us, who is the 4th president and CEO of LL Bean. And prior to joining LL Bean, he has worked at Resorts, Sports Network, Hannaford Supermarkets, and the Dahlhave Group. I hope I did not butcher that.
That's okay.
So the things we wanted to start with today is just sort of to ground us in why we're here and why it's so important to protect a place like Katahdin Woods Waters. So I'd really like to hear from each of you, and maybe we'll start with Shawn and have you describe, where did your love of nature come from? And then this question I think is always horrible because it's like choosing between your children, which is, what's your favorite place to get outside in Maine?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I think my love of nature, like a lot of folks my age, started just from the fact that we didn't have the distractions of electronics and video games. And if you didn't want to be bored, you better take it outside and have fun. So as children and my friends and I were always, outside from sunup to sundown, whether it's kind of going fishing or just, playing ice hockey on some frozen pond or whatever. But our lives kind of revolved around the outdoors. I think the love of nature probably started as I began to age, started working at a company like LL Bean, and I've always been a part of the company as a family member. But seeing the value in time outdoors, and that public spaces don't just happen, and beautiful trails don't just happen automatically for people to use. So I just started appreciating nature a little bit more as I aged, and also realized the importance of nature on my own kind of physical and mental well-being. And when I think of my favorite places in Maine, was that the question?
Favorite place to get outside in Maine.
Outside of Maine?
Outside in Maine.
Oh, outside. Okay, great. Outside in Maine. Boy, there are too many, but I'm going to go with the one that I go to most frequently, and that's probably the Carabasset region, because I ski at Sugarloaf and I mountain bike at the trails there, and I like hiking the Bigelows or the 8 sections of AT that run through there. So I would have to say the Carabasset Valley region.
And how about you, Lucas? How did you?
Yes, I mean, similar to Shawn, I spent most of my life, most of my upbringing just playing outside with there was no internet, there were no cell phones, there was no iPads. And so it was outside all the time. But it really solidified for me, I think, in high school. I had a high school teacher named Lorenzo Baker who would take us on winter backpacking trips. And my junior year, I went out with about 10 other kids for an 8-day trip in the White Mountains. And I felt really comfortable. And I never really achieved sort of leadership qualities in the classroom. But when I was in the outdoors, I felt so comfortable, and it was easy to help and encourage other people on that trip. And I felt that's where I first kind of discovered my own personal leadership, and kind of solidified in my head that I wanted to spend as much time working for the outdoors, exposing other people to the outdoors. And, that was really where it started.
Steve, would you like to share your connection?
Sure, definitely. I spent all my summers, I grew up outside New York City, but I spent all my summers up on a lake in the Adirondacks that my grandparents had a camp on. And, I'm third generation up there, and just every summer spent time, canoeing and swimming and fishing and water skiing. And it definitely just was a constant part of my summers. And I think I took it for granted until I graduated college and started working in New York City. And I started dating a woman who became my wife, who had an A-frame in the White Mountains. And we found ourselves on weekends heading up into the White Mountains near the Presidentials and hiking. And it was our getaway out of the city and into, hut-to-hut trips and all. And just made me fall in love with the New England outdoors in a new and different way, and really as a respite from getting out of the city. So yeah, that's sort of the beginning of my love. Obviously, coming back to Maine 5 years ago and into the role at LL Bean has further accelerated that love of the outdoors and that responsibility for the outdoors. To answer your question on favorite places in Maine, I'm still exploring a ton of them, so I've got a long list, but probably the one that I revert back to is the confluence of the Royal and the Cousins rivers, where they come out into the Casco Bay and out to Lanes Island, and then around Cousins and Chebeague and Littlejohn. And for stand-up paddleboarding and kayaking and fishing, it's just phenomenal. And then there's some great little hikes on Pemasong, which is a little park at the end of Littlejohn. And it's just classic Maine, where it's easy just to sit and stare at nature or be highly active. So that'd be my favorite spot. Second, of course, to Katahdin Woods Waters.
That's why I didn't answer. It was obvious what my favorite spot was.
Exactly.
It's always interesting to ask this question because almost everybody has some kind of connection to the outdoors and values the outdoors, and probably particularly in a place like Maine that has such a richness of outdoor opportunities. So when I think about those values, one of the things I think that's really interesting that I think people would like to hear about is, how did LL Bean become such a values-based company, and how does that drive what you do today, and how did that drive getting engaged with Katahdin Woods Waters?
I'll take that, and then Steve, if you want, you can jump on. But the company's values are really it's interesting. It's I think former governor of Maine, Jock McKernan, said, "Is Maine Maine because of LL Bean, or is LL Bean because of Maine?" And the values are somewhat intertwined. Yankee ingenuity, practicality, respect, integrity, perseverance, all these great values. But I would say that our values started when my great-grandfather started the company in 1912, and he probably had developed his values along the way because he was 40 years old when he started the company. But he spent his time in the outdoors hunting and fishing, hunting and trapping a lot because he had to. He was orphaned when he was 13 and he needed to survive, and was trapping to get along in life. But he has a quote that he said, to his mind, hunting and fishing is the big lure that draws us to the great open spaces and teaches us to forget the mean and petty things in life. And I just love that because it says so much about how we feel about the outdoors and why it's such an important part of our culture at Bean. And so his values were really strong. And I would say that he founded those, but then my Uncle Leon, who really took LL Bean from a relatively local player to what I would call a global player, he really codified those tenets in our corporate strategy document, where we talk about our core values, our stakeholder philosophy, and how as a values-based company, our stakeholders include our employees, our customers, our community, our vendors, obviously the shareholders, but also the natural environment. And that is, we make decisions. You have to think of the balance of all those and make sure that no one stakeholder is suffering or at the expense of another. So really solid things to build on. And I love that LL started it, my uncle codified it, and I get to shepherd and steward these values in this company for the fifth generation that's coming, my children and some of my nieces and nephews and cousins, and their children after them.
So when you think about those values, how does the work of Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters dovetail with L.L. Bean's values, and why did you become engaged with the project?
Well, I love that area. I've gone up and hiked Katahdin all my life. I think the land that Lucas's family has given to the state of Maine and to the country is incredible. Lucas took me up there very, very early on, and we get to paddle the East Branch of the Penobscot together, and I got to see part of Maine that I hadn't. But the whole notion of public access, I mean, if you think about what we're in business for, it's not just our values, but it's our purpose. We want to inspire and enable people to discover the restorative power of the outdoors. And I don't know a better place to do that than someplace like Katahdin Woods and Water, and whatever we can do to support them and get people excited about coming there. I mean, this is one of only 2 dark sky sanctuaries in the national park system, the only one east of the Mississippi. It's a powerful draw, and it's a powerful draw for a reason. It's absolutely stunning up there. So the connections for me were very easy.
So Steve, can you talk a little bit about how, what's the relationship between L.L. Bean and public lands in Maine and beyond? I know you all are engaged in a lot of work nationally. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. And, I would jump off a little bit of what Shawn said around, our purpose is around inspiring and enable people to experience the restorative power of the outdoors. And for us, and that's around the country, around the world as a mission and a purpose. And in the state of Maine, and specific to public lands, we've been a long time partner with Acadia and the Acadia National Park and the Friends of Acadia. And, specifically for public lands in Maine, we've made a lot of investments, a great partnership there to really help build out their infrastructure. And so excited about Katahdin Woods and Waters, and that it brings that same access to the outdoors to the interior of the state, to an area of the state where we want as many people as possible to not only experience the coasts and the amazing trails and mountains on the coast, but what the center of the country, what the center of the state has, and the beauty of Katahdin. And so, our partnership with Acadia has been great, and we're hoping to mirror that and even accelerate that, with the Katahdin Woods and Waters, the Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters.
And Lucas, thinking about that, what do you think, private public partnerships, what's the importance of that, and private philanthropy in protecting public places and national monuments and national parks?
Well, the way I think about it is philanthropy and the private partnership with public lands is the margin of excellence. We do require the federal government, the Park Service, Forest Service to invest in our public lands and make them as good as they can. But there's a lot of things that draw at the funds of our government. And so they do as much as they can, but there's always going to be a little bit more to be done. And so I think that's where that's where we have a great opportunity as philanthropists and businesses, especially related to the outdoors, is that we can make those trails just a little bit nicer. We can make sure that people have an experience in the outdoors that kind of suits their needs and draws them back, because those ultimately, those constituents are the ones that are going to buy the jackets and boots and various gear, and we want for them to have a place to go use it. So it makes sense to kind of make that investment. But it really is, it's important to understand that it is just the margin of excellence. It's not, we can't rely on philanthropy and the outdoor industry to provide all of the funding needed. But it's a great and important partnership.
So thinking about that, we're on the cusp, hopefully, of passing a really important federal legislation called the Great America Outdoors Act. And what do you think that will do for Katahdin Woods and Waters?
Well, to jump in, the land and water conservation funding is going to be fantastic. We will draw on it for various projects, from boat launches to trail building throughout the history or into the future. But beyond that, it's what I think is so important about LWCF is that, the tennis courts in my neighborhood were built by that money. The mountain bike trails and the land trust that I go ride on after work were help funded by those trails or by that funding. And so it really is just, it covers such a wide swath of American activity, from our great iconic national parks to the things that are right in our backyards. And it's this is, I think, one of the most powerful conservation tools that our country and our government has. And it also requires a municipal, state, and private match. So it also encourages that public-private partnership. So I'm thrilled to death that this is kind of coming to fruition.
I also think, just to add that with the Great American Outdoors Act, when that fully passes and is signed, it's going to raise awareness of the national parks and national monuments and national lands, because it's going to become a source of investment, a source of pride, a source of economic development in those communities, because the backlogs are going to be, the maintenance backlogs are going to start to be fixed. And I think there'll just be a greater consciousness across the country around our public spaces and what's available. And I think it's perfect timing, right as you're trying to raise the awareness of a new national monument, out here, obviously on the East Coast, where there aren't a lot of national park and national lands. So I think getting that act into the vernacular of the country and as part of the commentary about where we're investing our money as a country is phenomenal. And the timing is outstanding, I think.
I think it really fits right now with what we're all experiencing. And it was either your grandfather's or your uncle's quote about sort of a tonic for meanness and pettiness. But we're seeing more people outside than ever right now. You can't go out in your neighborhood without seeing more kids than you've ever seen before, teenagers you've never seen outside before, and families. And so, when you think about the Land and Water Conservation Fund in places like Katahdin Woods and Waters, they're wonderful places to take your family, but probably not where you can go every day, and people need close to home, as Lucas mentioned. And so, Shawn, can you talk a little bit about what LLB is doing nationally to make the outdoors accessible to all?
Sure. We've got some really good partnerships, obviously, with the National Parks Foundation that we work on to kind of build awareness and help people understand the accessibility to parks that are closer than they might think. So we've made some significant commitments to the national parks over the course of 5 years, and we're excited about that. In addition, we've got some work that we're doing with the Trust for Public Lands, which is investing in more urban areas. And honestly, it's timely as we're talking about racial equity and kind of doing our part to ensure that the outdoors is for everyone and safe for everyone, and being outside is accessible. But we've been doing this work for a while, largely in urban areas and largely within Black communities, to improve neighborhoods, build local farms for them or gardens for them to kind of maintain and take care of and provide some opportunities to get people outdoors. So we're doing a significant amount of work around accessibility. We love and we talk about this restorative power of the outdoors, but we also know that it doesn't take a grand adventure. You don't have to, I want people to go to the national parks, but it doesn't take that trip to a national park to really kind of experience that restorative power of being outside, and the health and wellness benefits that come from just literally being outside, stepping out your back door, looking at a starry sky, going on a walk in your neighborhood and identifying a trail. And the pandemic has added to that as well, as you kind of referenced. So many people are just finding that need to kind of recharge, restore, re-energize through time outside. And that's why we're seeing so many people outside. And I really hope it sustains and keeps going long after this pandemic is over, because the trends were going the wrong way before, and less people were getting outside. And now very excited. And Steve can tell you about sales, but I think we've run out of bicycles and kayaks at the store. People are getting out there, and I love it.
Shawn, I have to just add to the audience, for the authenticity of, as you were answering and talking about small adventures getting out your backyard, you are in your backyard, and you could hear the birds chirping as you were talking, and that was not sound effects, just for the record. That was awesome.
I couldn't get my cool background to work, so
yeah, it's real. It's awesome.
Natural one.
I'll also add that I went to try to buy a kayak for our kids at LB last weekend, and there were none. It's unbelievable. Like, there is not a, bicycles, bike racks, kayaks, they're sold out everywhere. It's incredible.
I tell you, it's been really cool. And Shawn just mentioned it before, but Lisa, I'll just give you a little bit of our business and our sales. Sort of, they are a mirror of the national sentiment. And in March and April, when the pandemic was declared and people moved to work from home, we blew out of selling slippers and cozy gear and cozy tops and pajama bottoms and stuff, because people were just hunkering down at home. Then we saw late April and into May, people really pushed out their back doors, and they were stuck in their homes, but they wanted to get outside. And we saw outdoor furniture and backyard games just literally up 400% versus last year. As Shawn said, people just stepped outside and they still stayed in their bubble, but they just pushed out to their front step or their backyard. And then, starting in May, when the weather started to turn across the country, and definitely in New England, all of a sudden, light hiking boots, windbreakers, as Lucas said, kayaks, boats, bikes, and all of that just portends so well for the future of people understanding and appreciating the outdoors, and understanding the open spaces that we have and the fresh air that you have. And if it starts in your backyard and it moves you to a local trail, and it eventually moves you to, hey, I want to drive up the road and I want to go to experience Katahdin Woods and Waters or Baxter State Park or Acadia or the White Mountains, like it is a beautiful silver lining of what's happening right now. It's just that appreciation of the outdoors. And, the more we can do to preserve open spaces, the better off we all are as we continue to explore, sort of those new horizons.
Really well said. We have to wrap up and move to questions, but one thing, just listening to you talk just now, I'd like each of you to just provide an insight. If a family or someone is listening that's never been to Katahdin Woods and Waters, where would you point them first? What should they go do first at Katahdin Woods and Waters?
I'll go first. It's really easy. My background is from Lucas, you'll name the spot, but it's the first outlook place. And once you get in on the access road and you start the loop, I think it's your first, in my mind, it was the first left-hand stop. And you open up and you look at this unbelievable view of Katahdin, which is that, if people don't know, that is Katahdin. It is right behind me. And, if you're going to experience it from a first spot, this is a great place to start. And then go find the secret spots that Lucas and Shawn know about.
Lucas knows about. I'm going to get up there more. Steve, I would have said something similar, because that is just, you drive there and that there's a moment of awe. That's a very impressive view. I would say, I mentioned that I paddled the East Branch with Lucas. I would love to see people get out and paddle. That waterway is like none other in Maine. It's really, really special. And I won't fully describe it well, but it's not like your typical rivers that are flowing through Maine. I can't even go into how much different it is, but the kind of the trees that you paddle through, and the landscape around it is different than the kind of rugged gorges that you kind of, you know, think of when you're paddling, you know, the Penobscot or the Dead or the Kennebec, and it's beautiful, and the fishing's pretty good too.
It always helps. I would have to say, if I were to send someone there this summer, it's been a hot and dry summer so far. So hiking into Oran Falls on the Wasatacook stream, it's this really cool stream. And the fact that the whole substrate is granite, big granite blocks all through it. And the river cascades from pool to pool. And there's all these little natural slides and swimming holes that you can just sit in and cool off. It's a really, really beautiful place. And there are several places within the monument where you feel so far from everything else in the world. And it's so amazing to me that you can be within a day's drive of a quarter of the population of the United States from the spot behind me or the spot behind Steve. But you feel so far away from everything. And that's really the magic of it. For me, it's just being completely disconnected, and there's no cell phone reception. So if you want to get away from, that's a good place to go.
Hey, Lucas, let me put you on the spot just because when I was up there with you last year, the year before, what was the place that we mountain biked to and swam? And then what was the new trail that had just been cut that you were describing, where it was cut intentionally on sort of the deciduous tree line that would over time show the effects of climate change and species and all? Just those two places were amazing. I know we're taking up time, but they were real recommendations too.
Yeah, so the place we went swimming was Oran Falls.
Okay.
That's where I would just recommend it. It is great there. And the trail is up Barnard Mountain. And like bang for the buck, it's a 4-mile round trip hike off the loop road, and it goes through this incredible northern hardwood forest. There's a place in the trail where it goes through a giant erratic that's the size of a living room, and the trail cuts through the middle of it, and then you follow this line as the forest turns from northern hardwood to a more boreal forest. It's a really, really cool place. And then at the top, you get this incredible view of Katahdin Lake and Katahdin itself.
Yeah, spectacular.
Well, that dovetails nicely into a set of questions I'm going to combine from one came in early. They're all three from people in Maine, but they're kind of combined. And what, Lucas, probably you're going to be best to answer these. Sort of what is the status of the development of facilities at Katahdin, particularly what's happening with development of trails, and how does the local community feel about what's happening at Katahdin?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the second part of your question. Everyone knows that this was relatively contentious as we kind of figured out how best to make this park fit in with the community and what to allow and what uses to allow. And it was a pretty long, deliberative process that ultimately came to resolution in 2016. And almost immediately, people started coming and businesses became busier. And there was a clear recognition that a lot of the things that people were worried about weren't going to happen. The uses that we allowed to be allowed, hunting and fishing included, snowmobiling, traditional things like that, were still allowed. And a lot of people were coming and enjoying it. And so those kind of concerns just faded away very quickly. And now I would say there's tremendous enthusiasm for the monument and all the communities around. The thing that's needed most of all is infrastructure. There's opportunities to build trails, to build visitor centers, to kind of connect everything to make a visitor experience enhanced. And that's what we're working on now. That is sort of the engagement that we have with LL Bean and various others, is that we're starting to kind of roll up our shirt sleeves and thinking about where does that infrastructure go. We've done, the Park Service has done a lot of listening, several listening sessions as they develop their management planning process. And we're taking that information and starting to cite for various trails. And so every year there's incrementally more and more things added. It's a big place. You can fit almost 3 Acadia National Parks into Katahdin Woods and Waters, and you can imagine how much infrastructure is in Acadia. So there's a long way to go, but the future is bright.
And we have a question from a listener, and this was something I was unaware of, and it's very exciting, is that you are a designated dark sky sanctuary at Katahdin Woods and Waters. And the specific question is that Maine has a growing number of locations that are considered dark sky destinations, but it's hard to gauge the local economic benefits. Is that something that Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters or Ella Bean or the outdoor industry might be willing to underwrite? So how, I guess the question would be, I'm less familiar with the dark sky designations. Do you think there's an economic benefit to having a dark sky designation?
I'll start by saying that I don't know if anyone's been to Big Bend National Park, but it's a difficult one to get to. Right on the border of Texas and Mexico, on the Rio Grande. It is at least a 5-hour drive from the nearest airport that commercial flights can fly into. It is out there. And their biggest point of promotion is the astrotourism. People come down there because the air is dry, there's no lights around, and you can see the sky. And people come from all over the world to see it. So there's definitely an economic opportunity. People travel from all over the world. We were talking earlier about the eclipse. There's going to be a total solar eclipse in April of 2024. That, you know, hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world are going to come to Maine to see this. So it's a real thing, and I think, and certainly the Friends are promoting it. And you know, as we start thinking about the investments that that we make in the region and in the park, it'll be an eye toward promoting and protecting the dark skies will be a part of our work.
I would just jump in on to take that up a level of, you know, the outdoor recreation economy is huge in the United States and in the state of Maine, and any investment into open spaces and infrastructure and reasons to get outdoors is absolutely fantastic for economic development, whether it's local employment, whether it's local businesses that pop up, as well as just, you know, the overall mental health and physical health benefits of outdoor recreation. And so, you know, whether it's fantastic trails, amazing paddling, great fishing, great hunting, or dark skies, any of those reasons are really powerful economic drivers for economies, and especially rural economies. And, you know, as Lucas said, like the dark sky designation it's really rare and really unique. So it should be a driver of traffic to an area of the state that doesn't get a lot of traffic. So the economic benefits should be real.
Great. And we have a bundle of questions, no surprise, related to COVID-19. So I'm going to try to wrap these together. One is around, how is COVID-19 directly affecting Katahdin Woods and Waters, especially with the required 14-day quarantine required for out-of-state residents? And then how do we expect COVID-19 to change Katahdin Woods and Waters?
You gonna take those, Lucas?
Yeah, well, so you know, I'm not an expert on the pandemic, but I will say, you know, and the rules that are in place for a reason here in Maine. But what's interesting is that that most early visitation to the monument were people from Maine. And so that's really encouraging to see. And it's a real great opportunity from, you know, when I think about, you know, Mainers getting to know Maine better, it's great and really exciting to see that folks are coming and exploring this place, because it's pretty unique, and it's been somewhat difficult to get to for a long time. You know, the quarantine is definitely having a huge impact on the visitation to Maine, and we hope that we can work through it as quickly as we can. But we also recognize that safety is of utmost importance. But I was listening to a statistician talking about the rate of infection with COVID, and there was a lot of data that she was kind of working through. And at the end of it, the person that was interviewing said, okay, so just tell me, like, what's the very safest thing you can do if you're not going to stay home and quarantine with your family? And she said, stay in small groups and be outside. So that Katahdin Woods and Waters is the place you certainly can do that. There's plenty of space, and there's not a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yet.
Yes. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
and I think that's really important, and it's related to this next question. Steve talked about the outdoor recreation economy. Lucas and Shawn have both talked about what the outdoors can provide right now, and that it may be the only safe place you can go. So in thinking about that, this next question was, how can Mainers visiting the monument also support local businesses? Are there guides, places to rent mountain bikes, lodging that you'd recommend, or recommend how they find out what's there? So we want to support local businesses.
Yeah, please support local businesses.
Before Lucas answers around Millinocket, obviously, if you're coming through Freeport, there's a pretty good destination where you could stop to get yourself suited up to head on up. But then once you get up there, I'll hand it over to Lucas for some of the local businesses up in the Millinocket area and all.
And I would have said that.
Probably better if you said it.
Yeah. But there's a regional chamber of commerce, the Katahdin Area Chamber of Commerce, and they have listings of all the different places that you can stay, and they range dramatically in experience, and there's all kinds of really cool things to do and people to stay with and various different guides. And it's hard to just pick out a couple and say go here and do this, because it's there's a lot of things to do, but there's a lot of great places to go, restaurants, guides, outfitters, places to stay, plenty of grocery stores and amenities to get everything you need for time outdoors.
And I think it'll just continue to develop, right? So there's infrastructure up there that's needed as more people come to that region. And I think that's part of the question you asked earlier of how people feel up there. There's been a really nice shift in tenor from when this project was originally an idea, almost a decade ago, to where it is now, where people really understand the economic impact of something like Katahdin Woods and Water, and that Millinocket region that has been hit hard, is going to benefit greatly from something like this, and just more and more infrastructure, more opportunities will show up as the years progress too.
Indeed.
And I noticed people are putting into the chat some very specific places you can go. So for those of you listening and you want to look at the chat, somebody has had some very specific ideas about businesses to support in Millinocket. We've talked about this a little, and this is a really specific question that came in earlier, but it's a really detailed question, so I'm going to give it to you, Lucas, which is, regarding Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument, what is the present status of the donors' reserved rights? And then there was another question about what is the status of tribal involvement?
Super question. So I wasn't, just to be clear, I wasn't going to initially be a part of the panel, and then Steve and Shawn were like, well, we need someone with a beard. So Lucas, maybe you will join. So I reluctantly said, okay. But so I'm glad I'm able to answer this specific question. And when we transferred the land to the federal government, to the National Park Service, we reserved the rights to build infrastructure for 7 years. And it's got restrictions, but it allows us to do a non-federal act on federal land. And it can be in various places and with various different things that are allowed. And so we've decided to exercise those rights, and we're working on a few projects related to the visitor experience, and working on a comprehensive project that we're calling a monumental welcome. And we'll roll more of that out as we go. But the idea is to provide that welcome for visitors from all over the world, so they can really maximize and fully understand the landscape in which they're visiting. And one of the things that we feel incredibly important is reestablishing indigenous culture in this landscape. This is, traditional, the lands of the Penobscot Nation and the Wabanaki Confederacy used this land for thousands of years. And we want to make sure that we're still focusing on the present day and looking into the future in the engagement with the Wabanaki Confederacy. So one thing that we did is we started to establish the monumental welcome is we asked the chiefs of the 4 federally designated tribes in Maine to appoint people to be part of a tribal council. and then work in collaboration with us, designing everything from the interpretive things that people will learn, to the way trails are laid out, to the orientation of buildings. It's been an incredible process. We've learned so much about their history, about their arts and crafts, about the way they use the landscape, and a lot about the way they're looking to the future. And it's made this much more of a dynamic project than it ever would have been otherwise.
Amazing.
The final question that came in advance was, how do you see the private sector benefiting from and supporting development of the monument?
Yeah, I think I sort of answered that a little bit earlier. I think the economic development of new infrastructure, of new public lands, of outdoor recreation, what comes with that. It's a little bit of that question of, you get outfitters and guides and restaurants and places to stay. And so, I think when you have a new public land, it benefits all. It benefits business as well as, the environment and as well as the local communities. Really simply, the more people you have outside, the better you have for physical health and mental health and happier communities and all. And so, I think this designation helps, all components of the economy, including, from a mental and physical health perspective.
From a role of private sector in support of parks and public spaces, I mean, like when you think of LLB, and this is a synergistic relationship, right? Without the public lands, we don't have places for people to recreate. And without places for people to recreate, we don't have a good business selling outdoor gear and apparel. So I think it's incumbent upon, businesses like ours and people who are good stewards of the outdoors or benefit to support public lands and friends of public lands and the organizations and national parks foundations and system and other things as well, because we benefit greatly from them. And I think I mentioned early on, as you were talking about where my appreciation or love from the outdoors came, it was like I did have this realization that these wonderful trails that I ride my bikes on or hike on don't just come, they come from people's volunteer work. They come from, the LWCF funds. So they come from a whole host of sources, but it's pretty clear that the public dollars can't do it all, right? We see that. I mean, it's just very obvious. So I think there is a role that consumers of these areas who, want to participate, should do some part, whether it's helping maintain, advocating for, or giving to. And I think there's a role, especially for companies like ours, to participate as well, which we do, and obviously with this one we will. So.
Yeah, it's interesting being in this line of work for as long as I have. We know even if you build it, not everybody may come, and that some people aren't comfortable in the outdoors. So I'd really like to hear about what Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters is doing to help connect that next generation that might not have easy access or experience, or doesn't have that mentor at home that takes them out for that first paddle or that first fish or that first hike.
Yeah, one of the most important pieces of programming that we're doing is this place-based learning objective. So there's a lot of life sciences and history and geology and geography that you can learn in public spaces. So we work with the Park Service, which has a developed curriculum that teaches about all of those various things, and then taking educators in the greater Katahdin region and passing along that curriculum. So it's taught both in the classroom and then bringing children out into the park to actually learn to live it in real life. One of the best examples I've seen of this sort of play out was David Shaw, who is a Mainer and philanthropist, was on the board of the National Park Foundation, and worked a lot on the second century effort in Acadia National Park, and was really dedicated to sciences and did a lot of this similar funding, getting students out to learn about the life sciences in parks. And he made this documentary about the work. And there's this great part in it. Actually, I think, Shawn, you and David and I were on a panel maybe a bunch of years ago talking about this, but I think it was at that panel when they played the film. And there's this girl kind of digging around in the mud in this tidal basin, finding dragonfly larvae. And she's like learning about the life cycle of dragonflies and what they eat. And the narrator or the filmmaker said, where's your textbook? And she looked up at him just completely confused, like, textbook? What do you mean? And it just, you could just see it dawning on her, like, this is my textbook. I'm learning hands-on in the outdoors, learning it in real time, seeing it for what it really is. And there's just no substitute for that type of learning. And so the Friends is really dedicated to that, thinking about a long-term effects in the Katahdin region as we think about more access to the outdoors, more use of outdoor recreation, promoting a new type of economy, starting with students in grade school, will dramatically change what that's like in 20 or 30 years as the constituency will grow and they will become more excited. And when they become available, or when they become in positions of power to make decisions about what the towns do and how to develop trails, they're going to be excited about it. And so it's a long game, but I think it's a really important thing. And that was one of the first pieces of programming that the Friends did.
It's a great story.
Shawn or Steve, maybe you could talk about what LL Bean is doing to connect the next generation to the outdoors through your Be Outsider campaign or anything you want to talk about.
Steve can jump on this too, but I mean, to Lucas's point, I mean, our whole objective is to, we kind of focus a little bit on the people part of the outdoors as our purpose, but that's because the planet part of our outdoors is so important. And we think that the more people you get outdoors, you start creating better stewards of the outdoors. And just as Lucas said, you'll have more opportunities. So some of the trends that we're seeing of people spending time indoors, and it's pretty, known statistic that if your parents didn't spend time outdoors, you're probably not likely to spend time outdoors. So it's kind of reversing these trends and things we can do. That's kind of our day in, day out efforts at LLB. And so we do a whole lot of things with youth programming, and our donations are focused on areas where we can increase accessibility for kids to get outdoors. Adults too, but kids is a big part of that. And Steve, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just add in that, we have long had an experiential part of our business called our outdoor discovery programs. And that, this year obviously is a little bit different with COVID-19, but it includes, a very successful, popular kids camp. And then the outdoor discovery programs are all about introducing people of all ages, but we specifically make sure we have kids programming as well to, how to hike, how to camp, how to fly fish, how to stand up paddleboard, and all kinds of skills that people need. And, to Shawn's earlier point, like not everybody has a parent or a grandparent or a neighbor who takes them to learn those outdoor skills. And, that outdoor discovery program is built to provide those baseline basic skills all the way up to multi-day trips where you're using, more sophisticated equipment. And it's a fantastic outreach to any new outsider of any age. And then some really good specifically tailored programs for kids.
Thank you. Well, we have to wrap up now. I think we got to all the questions. We're going to turn it back over to Andrew from the Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters, but I just really want to thank the three of you for participating in this today. And it's clear you love Maine and you love Katahdin Woods and Waters, and you've thought a lot about these issues. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Lisa.
And Andrew is coming to us from a dark sky location, it appears.
That's right. I couldn't help but answer the question that's been going through my head that I want to answer, and I have the floor, so I can, is like, what's my favorite place? And shout out to the people that made this International Dark Sky Sanctuary possible. In addition to paddling the river like Shawn has done, I was out there last summer with some friends on a crisp night, moonless. And I saw them down by the river, and they were putting their hands on the ground, like our eyes had adjusted quite well. I'm like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, we're trying to see if we have a shadow from the Milky Way cast on the ground. It's how dark and how much you can experience the outdoors. So any place with an open canopy is a great place to go. And I know that LL Bean sells tents with mesh tops. So if you take off that fly, you don't even have to get out of your tent to experience the spectacular night skies in Katahdin Woods Waters National Monument. So I want to just wrap us up by saying thank you so very much, Lisa, Shawn, Steve, Lucas. We are so proud to be partnering with you through LL Bean and the Outdoor Industry Association to create America's next great, hopefully at some point, national park. Right now it's a great national monument, and we're really excited. We also want to say thank you to all of the attendees. Many of you are members of Friends of Katahdin Woods Waters. You help provide that margin of excellence that Lucas was talking about to make this place even more special and enjoyed by even more people by all generations. So we thank you for attending. If you want to get more involved with either resources, visiting the park, or becoming a member yourself, you could do so at friendsofkww.org. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram as well. I think we got to almost all of the questions, but if there wasn't a question that was answered, please reach out to us. We are on standby at any time to answer your questions and help direct you in the right way to experience this along with the National Park Service. This was, like I mentioned earlier, the first of our series. I'm really excited to announce that next month in July, we'll be having a conversation with Roxanne Quimby, who is Lucas's mother and one of the founders of Burt's Bees, personal care products. And she will be having a conversation with Sally Jewell, who is the former Secretary of the Interior under President Obama. And we're really looking forward to that discussion. So please stay tuned. We'll be announcing the date and time of that very soon. So with that, I just want to say thanks one more time. I hope you all stay safe in this time and get a chance to be an outsider, either at Katahdin Woods Waters National Monument or another one of our great outdoor spaces. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, everybody. Great job.
Thank you, Lisa.
See you later, Shawn.